Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurialism and distinguish themselves from others, because being a lawyer doesn't have to mean doing business as usual. I'm your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps Insurance, the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. Founded for lawyers by lawyers over 30 years ago, Alps works directly with your firm. No broker or agent, and if you do have a claim, the Alps claims handling team is comprised of actual attorneys, all with private experience. Alps roots for the law firms they protect. They believe in your success and nurture your endeavors with industry-leading coverage, risk management resources, and accredited CLEs, offering practical advice for pioneering lawyers like you. And Alps has the slickest online application out there. Qualifying firms can apply, see rates, and bind coverage in about 20 minutes. Right now, you can get 25% off one CLE seminar from Alps. Go to alpsinsurance.com/CLE. That's ALPS insurance.com/CLE and use the promo code Lawyerpreneur upon checkout. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a .1, you can help pay for the time it takes in creating and editing Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the interview. My guest today is Becki C. Lee. She is an intellectual property lawyer with Seyfarth in Atlanta, and she is the author of the brand new children's book about IP rights, Do You Draw Pictures? Becki, welcome to Lawyerpreneur.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so a little context for everybody who's listening to the conversation. You and I know each other.
Yes.
Although we've never met in person.
Right.
We're part of the same lawyer Slack community where we kind of knew each other a little bit, but then over the last 6 months when we've been working on Do You Draw Pictures, which I'm I guess the publisher for, I'd say we've gotten to know each other a little better. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Tell me about what Do You Draw Pictures is and why you wrote it.
Well, I can tell you what it isn't, and it's not a treatise. So I worry that some people have high expectations for what they're going to learn from this book. It's very much a 101. This is what a trademark is. This is what a copyright is. Inventions can be patented, etc. And it's for very small kids, about ages 4 to 8. And I started just writing it for my kids because my 4-year-old son was really interested in trademarks, just from the perspective of pointing them out as we drove by stores and things like that. And then it kind of morphed into this bigger thing.
So more generally, did that kind of spark in you okay, he's already noticing these things that he's inundated with his, the rest of his life. And so I want to explain it to him what it is and means. Is that kind of how that worked?
Yeah. And we read to both kids all the time, and we read all these different books. And now there are books on more complicated topics, but broken down for children, like science and history, etc. And I thought, well, I could just do a poem about IP because I know what it is. I work with it every day. And, I'll write this funny poem about copyrights and trademarks for Wyatt and Ruby, and I'll maybe show it to some close friends. And that'll be the end of it. But yeah, it was, it's just not something that's talked about to young children. And so I thought, why not? I'll just write it down. And then, as you know, while I was thinking about just putting it out on a limited basis, I kind of started thinking, well, there's not a lot of, let me put it this way. There is a lot of misinformation about IP, and everyday folks talk about copyrights and trademarks, and they're not always right, but it's not their fault. It's just that almost everything that's in the media and pop culture is wrong about intellectual property. Yeah. So, let's get them started from a young age.
Yeah. All you got to do is go to Twitter or some social media conversation where these things come up, and it's all the bad takes.
Yeah, yeah. Like you're not gonna copyright your invention or trademark your idea. Yeah.
All right. So were you kind of actively working on writing this? How long did it take, or was it just like the muse struck you with an idea and you wrote it all down at once?
The latter. It happened really quickly. I was actually reading to my 2-year-old daughter, and an idea popped into my head, just one stanza of the book. And after I put her down, I went downstairs and typed it out on my phone. And then my husband came downstairs from putting our 4-year-old to bed. And I said, hey, I think I wrote a children's book. And at that point, it was probably like 10 or 15 stanzas. And I eventually added an intro and kind of a so what conclusion. And that was it.
About when was that? Do you remember?
It was before the pandemic, but not too, it was probably a month or two before the shutdown.
Okay. And the reason I ask is because, I don't know, a few weeks after the lockdown set in, I went on LinkedIn one day, and this is how I get involved in this story. I went on LinkedIn and said, hey, I've seen a lot of interesting and innovative, creative things that people are doing. If you're one of those people, why don't you share what you're doing? And because at that point I had started this podcast and there were just a lot of people doing things. And you were one of the folks who responded.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember what your response was, but I think
I don't either. I just said, I wrote a children's book about intellectual property, expecting to get maybe one like on that comment. And then you responded and asked a question about it, I think. And then we started talking, and that's when you told me you were thinking about putting out other law books. And I was like, well, it's not really a law book, but it is a law book. So, okay.
Right. Because I have this idea that, my first book I had published with the ABA, and I've talked about this a little bit on here, and I had control over what I wrote, but they had a lot of control over the ultimate product. And so I wanted my 2 more recent books I published independently, and I created a publishing imprint, Scarlet Oak Press, and because I wanted to control things more than what that allowed for. And I also had this idea that I think there's a lot of lawyers who have time to write. Well, maybe make time to write is better if they choose to, but don't necessarily want to get into all of the business of publishing and spending years learning about that. And so I had the idea that I want to create a platform for other lawyers who, if they want to publish their books and retain some control, that's available to them. And so I reached out to you with that and was like, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. And ultimately, we have.
Yeah, I'm excited about it because at first I thought, well, he's not going to want to put this out because it's not for lawyers. But then I thought, well, lawyers are going to buy this for their kids because a lot of us have a hard time explaining to our kids what we do for a living. My son for a long time was mispronouncing, or maybe pronouncing correctly, lawyers as liars. And that was pretty much all he knew. And he told one of his teachers the other day that she said, what do your parents do? And he said, they work at home on their computers. I was like, yeah, okay, that's true.
Yeah. And my son, who's 5, says, he says, I'm an office worker. And, that's pretty true.
It's true.
I would try to make it sound a little better, but, that's what it comes down to most days. And meanwhile, my wife, he tells people she works at the hospital, and that's way cooler.
Right. Yeah. That's something people can really grasp onto and go, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But you tell people you're a lawyer and they're like, or they have some problem they have with something that's not in your practice area, and you don't know what to do.
All right. So you and I decided to work together. We laid out a contract because we both wanted to accomplish a couple of particular things. And that is, while when I wrote my books, I have wanted to maintain control of my intellectual property rights. You also wanted that for yourself. So why don't you tell
Mhm.
folks how we structured, and we don't have to get into the details of everything, but I think it's important for people who are considering publishing or considering, various aspects of this to understand the different layers of it and what's possible. So why don't you kind of outline how we structured ours and what it enabled you to do as far as your intellectual property rights?
Sure. So, before I did anything, I think before you and I ever even talked, I had already registered or applied to register my first draft with the Copyright Office because I felt like, what kind of IP lawyer would I be if I didn't do that?
Sure, that'd be like me driving around without car insurance.
Right, exactly. So, so I felt very strongly that I wanted to keep the copyright in my written word. And thankfully, you and I came from sort of an even playing field in terms of, I guess, bargaining power, or you had a lot more experience in publishing and books and such than I did. And then I had this very personal thing that I had written. So we both had our own, I guess we had sort of even consideration. So it was easy for us to say, okay, I will give you this exclusive license and we can put this one book out and then go from there. And so it's maybe the easiest negotiation I've ever entered into.
So does that mean one of us lost or both of us lost if we were both happy
Yes,
with the way it turned out?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's probably what that means. I'm sure someone would look at it and be like, why did you do this? But it's, it's always from the perspective of the other person, like, well, it just ended up that you wanted to put this out and I needed help putting it out. And yeah, I'm sure if I had gone to Random House, we would be telling a very different story right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay.
So after that initial hurdle, which we cleared, you had to get somebody to illustrate it. Ultimately, you hired may not be the right word. The illustrator is somebody you've known for a long time. Tell us about who it is and what y'all's relationship is.
It's Walter Jakowski. I call him Wally because I've known him for a really long time now, but he's professional now. He goes by Walter. He'll probably be embarrassed that I said that, but it's hard for me not to call him Wally. Anyway, yes. So he and I were actually in a band together in Detroit called Wally Jakowski and the Consequences of His Stupid Actions. And it was just the two of us. And we covered some punk songs and we played some originals and it was a lot of fun. It was right before I moved back from Detroit back to Atlanta. And he and I had kept in touch over the years. I actually the last time I saw him in person was I went up for the Cardozo BMI moot court competition, the copyright moot court competition in New York City. And he was managing a bar there. And I just went and hung out with him after my competition was over. And so we had kept in touch. I knew he was a designer, a graphic designer and a bar manager, but I also knew that he still drew. And he used to do our band posters for our shows and stuff like that. So I had gone around and around about what to do for illustrations. And then ultimately I felt like I wanted to work with someone that I trusted and that I knew. And I also wanted the illustrations to be simple and to complement the words instead of overpowering them. Because, some books are gorgeous, but then you don't know what the story is. You just know that you really like the picture. So I wanted it to have sort of a give and take of that. So I went to him and he said, are you sure? Are you sure you want me to do this? I said, yes, I'm positive. And he and I started working together and he also felt strongly about keeping copyright in his illustrations. And because he's a friend and I trust him and we have a good relationship, it was easy to say, okay, great, let's make this happen. And it was a really collaborative experience.
All right. So one of the things that I just have really enjoyed about this project in its entirety is how certain things have connected. You and Walter, who have known each other for a long time, are working on this together and brought this thing to life. My decisions to independently publish my last two books led us to being able to work together, because if I had not written them or had just continued to go through the ABA, I wouldn't have had the experience or even been involved in this field where I was in a position to do it. And then, the online community that we're a part of with LawyerSmack, all of these things, because we wouldn't have met otherwise, we just wouldn't have come across each other.
Right.
There's just a whole confluence of events that allowed this project to turn out the way that it has. And any number of different decisions by any one of us would have had a different result. And I just think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's great too. I think most of my jobs and opportunities and fun things that have happened in my life have sort of come about that way. And it's always fun and surprising because it'll come out of some kind of big change or disaster in my life. And, things will just kind of fall into place. So it's given me a good perspective in terms of, yeah, the world is a dumpster fire right now. But if you just take it one day at a time, maybe something good will come along.
Oh, I totally agree. And I can say the same thing about so many decisions in my life. And for example, I graduated college a semester early with an education degree. And there are not a lot of places hiring mid-year usually. And so there was a school in Atlanta and then one just north of Birmingham and then one in North Carolina. And I didn't have ties to any of them. But I went to the one in Birmingham and had a great visit, and they offered me the job and I took it, having no ties to Birmingham and no plans to even really stay, because I had these romantic notions of moving out west and living in Wyoming and Montana and that sort of thing. And, because of that decision, so many things have followed, including marrying an Alabama girl, for one. And so, it's just that one decision that had such a culminating effect on everything that's followed.
Yeah, I totally understand that. When I moved to Detroit, it was to work for this startup record label, and they ran out of money like a year or so into me moving up there. And so a guy I knew at a record label in Chicago was going to give me a job doing PR for him. But I was dating this guy and I was like, oh, I don't want to leave Detroit yet. And the recession hit early in Detroit. So the economy was already pretty bad there. And I literally took my first unemployment check, and the record label let me keep my laptop that they had bought for me. And that's how I started my PR firm. So,
wow.
Yeah.
All right. So did your work in music have any effect on the legal career that you eventually embarked on?
Yeah, it was everything. I mean, I went into law school knowing I wanted to do IP law. I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to look like. At first, I was dead set on being an entertainment attorney because that was my background. And I knew entertainment attorneys, and I'd worked with bands, and I'd worked with events and media, etc. But I met I talked to pretty much every IP and entertainment lawyer I could find in Atlanta when I first started. And I met this guy, Charles Dreby, who manages the Blind Boys of Alabama. And I talked to him on the phone one day, and he was like, look, this was 2011. So the effects of the 2008 were still happening. There was no on-campus interviews. There were no jobs. He was like, if you decide to be an entertainment attorney, you're going to have to hustle for the rest of your life. If you decide to be an IP attorney, you're going to have a steady job. So I had already been an entrepreneur and run my own business for a little over 4 years. And I don't want to say I was not good at it or that I'll never do it again, but the business of running my business took over my business. I couldn't do my work anymore. And this Detroit circa 2008 was enough to give me, I had to move back to my parents' house at 29 and start waiting tables after I had been my own boss. So I still have a little bit of PTSD from that. So I went the IP route, and thankfully I found my current boss who was really into music. He was working with Georgia Lawyers for the Arts, like trying to do pro bono stuff. And I was interning there, and he needed somebody to help with this new trademark portfolio that had come in. And I kind of found this perfect marriage of, I get to have some entertainment clients still, and I get to do a lot of copyright work, but I also get to do really interesting trademark work for bigger companies. And it's more of a steady stream of different kinds of work. I'm not having to kind of hustle and go out and find business, although I am still doing business development, but it's not like my life depends on it anymore. So, but I did know, like, all through law school, it was IP. So I studied all the copyright stuff. I did as much with Georgia Lawyers for the Arts as I could. And I stayed in touch with people from the music business and wrote some articles on trademarks for bands and stuff like that.
Well, that's really cool to hear a story from somebody whose careers have kind of aligned and crossed paths like that, because that is not my story at all. Nothing touched anything else. In law school, I went in thinking that I wanted to be a prosecutor, and quickly discovered that wasn't going to be for me. And so after that, everything was very broad and not very deep as far as what I was learning, because I didn't have any idea where that was going to eventually land. Going back to the book and the work that you're doing, you copyrighted, or you filed the application for the copyright for the text early on, but you have also applied your craft knowledge by applying for a trademark. Tell me about that.
Yes. So as I was writing the book and collaborating with Walter, I realized that this book could turn into a series, because there are not a lot of law books out there for kids. I don't know if there are any, but I think maybe there are a few, but not a lot. And so I thought, okay, well, let's be optimistic and act as if this is definitely going to turn into a series, and let's give it a name. And also, my trademark attorney brain was thinking, you can't get a trademark registration for a single work title. So for example, I could not apply for a trademark for Do You Draw Pictures? So I thought, the other advantage of this will be having any trademark registration to go with my book. So I'm hoping to turn it into a series with multiple channels of expansion called Little Gavels. And I did apply for a trademark registration for printed materials and educational materials. And so hopefully that is going to be as big as I want it to be.
Do you know yet other topics that you want to write about?
Yes, I have started writing a book for younger kids about agreements. I'm going to start with things that I know, things that I deal with every day, because once I go into other areas of law, I'm going to need help. So I want to get some stuff down out of my head and onto paper that I know first. And so contracts is something I deal with every day. So I'm starting there. And then as you know, but I don't think I've really talked about anywhere else, Walter and I are going to try to do a comic book series for older kids. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but it'll definitely have little gavels still in the name somewhere. Because people have been asking when this one came out, people said, are you going to do something for older kids? And I thought, well, that's the kind of stuff that does come up for preteens and teenagers. Like, we have a band. What are we going to call it? Well, what if this other band has a similar name? What are we going to do? So that's the kind of stuff that starts coming up way before kids ever learn about IP, and it'll be good for them to learn it at that stage.
All right. So it sounds like the first series may be more introducing ideas, and then the things for older kids may be applying those ideas through story.
Yes, exactly. And I'm talking to some local attorneys and other IP professionals about using the existing book to teach Girl Scouts and other young kids, and hopefully going to school libraries, et cetera, and kind of applying the ideas with even younger kids. So, okay, well, you just invented this cool new robot that does whatever. Let's talk about patents. I'm not a patent attorney, but we'll bring a patent attorney with us. But, just to kind of introduce the basics to the 10-ish year olds as well.
All right. So marketing books can be tough. Marketing children's books can be particularly tough because, when you're writing for adults, you can market directly to the adults. You can find them wherever they are and go present this. Hey, I wrote this thing. You don't get to talk to the kids generally, unless it's part of an organization like you just mentioned about. Has your practice, has being an IP lawyer opened up any avenues for marketing that you maybe hadn't even thought of previously?
Yes, definitely. I was really surprised. For example, when I first mentioned this on LinkedIn, I thought maybe 10 of my friends would see it. And somehow a bunch of IP attorneys were like, oh, this is great. I got to get this for my kids. And cool idea, et cetera. And they started sharing, and then people would see it in their newsfeed. And so yeah, I think I'll be able to market it to IP attorneys. Also, a lot of inventors have been saying it sounds like a cool idea. So that's a whole group of people that I've never tapped into because I'm not a patent attorney. And so I think it'll be cool to also go to people who just invent stuff for a living, which is, I can't wrap my head around that, but I think it sounds really cool. So hopefully those folks, thankfully I still know a lot of artists and creators and musicians, and they're going to be interested from that perspective, like teaching their kids to protect their work before it becomes an issue. So it's funny, I sound so nerdy saying this, but I feel like it's true. Intellectual property affects literally everyone, and they don't realize it necessarily. But as I have started to tell people about the book, I realize that even if it doesn't affect people in a direct way, they are interested in it because they hear about disputes between celebrities or big companies or whatever, and they want to know about it too. So like, I have a friend who's a doctor, and her husband works in business, and they don't work in intellectual property at all, but they're going to get a copy for their kids just because they thought, oh, it's an interesting topic, I want to teach my kids. So I'm hoping that people will find something in it that they like, regardless of what they do for a living. So I don't know. I'm going to try everything.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that what's interesting about the book, and part of what drew me to it, is like, this isn't a book for lawyers and lawyers' kids. This is a book for all kids, because whether they want to eventually start their own business, or they want to write music or their own stories, regardless of any of that, before most of these kids can read, I mean, before my kid who's in kindergarten now could even read, he understood, like, at an intrinsic level what copyright is, in that he could identify, or I'm sorry, I said copyright. He could identify, Jack's restaurant or McDonald's, or just by seeing it, which is the whole
Right.
point, is that, like, just by seeing this one letter, you know exactly what you're looking at and you know what to expect from it. And so I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's really funny because I sort of created a monster with my son. Anytime he would see the circle R, he'd be like, "Look, mommy, a trademark! Mommy, a trademark!" And I'm sure it drove my husband crazy, but I think it's funny now. And he also has started to recognize the TM, and sometimes he'll see something that he knows is a trademark, but he doesn't see the symbol next to it. He's like, "Mommy, there's no R next to this one, but isn't this a trademark?" And I'm like, "Oh boy, let's talk about trademark symbols." So he probably will know too much and annoy the crap out of his friends with it. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what hit me. Like, the concepts are simple. And I feel like as attorneys, I don't want to generalize, but I'm going to anyway. I feel like as attorneys, all of us at some level, whether we do it aggressively or just even maybe subconsciously, are gatekeepers because we are knowledge workers. And so if we spread that knowledge, are we going to put ourselves out of a job? I think no. I don't think we're going to put ourselves out of a job. As an intellectual property attorney, I've got intangible on top of intangible. But I think the value in having an attorney is helping you navigate the nuances, but you can't even ask the right questions to get to the nuances if you don't understand the building blocks. And so when I see a 4-year-old who can understand trademark law at a very basic level, I think, well, how is it that this, journalist who's writing about the latest trademark dispute doesn't understand that getting a trademark for candy doesn't mean that no one can ever use the word candy again? So it's not their fault. Like I said earlier, it's just that it's not taught in schools. And so I think the more we can get that information out there and stop being a gatekeeper for that knowledge, it'll help everybody's conversations, because then when somebody comes to me to ask me a question about IP law, where I'm not having to bring them up to speed, we can kind of get to it a little bit quicker.
Right. Because if they already can identify their problem, that helps them be able to communicate with you better so that you can more effectively solve it for them.
Yes, exactly. And it can maybe help them register their own copyright or register their own trademark without an attorney's help, which is possible. It's straightforward to a certain extent. Go to an attorney if you get an office action. A lot of people can't afford even to pay an online provider to register their trademark for them, but they can afford the filing fee. So, yeah, I think it's important for people to be able to help themselves up to a point where then they need more help.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I like that mindset. And that's something that we've talked about a lot here, is an abundance mindset, where there's, the idea that there's always more where that came from. And people are going to continue to have problems, and you aren't likely to put yourself out of work by educating and helping folks.
Yeah, I heard this interview one time with a doctor who is working on like AI and mobile apps that can help you diagnose yourself. And, people are worried that AI is going to put people out of a job. And his response really struck me, because he said that AI helps you get to a certain point where then the doctor can spend more time getting to know the patient and really understanding not only the diagnosis, but how to handle it, instead of just like head down in the computer entering data, and then maybe you miss something that they said that would have clued you in. I feel the same way about law. If I can get, the trademark maintenance and application process. And my boss has been really great about this with using technology. But if you can handle the routine stuff in the most efficient way possible, then you have more time to sit with the client and really strategize, like, how do you want to use your IP portfolio? What is your goal with this? How much do you want to enforce it? That sort of thing, and really get to know the client and understand their goals.
Yeah, I'm all about elevating the level of conversation and understanding so that we can more, effectively work for our clients. And so one of the things I tell my clients all the time, and I know that my kind of work differs from what a lot of other folks do, is, if you have a claim come up in Alabama and it's a weird issue that you've never interacted with before, and you just need to ask somebody a question, even if it's a file that is never going to get sent to me, it's never going to go to litigation, but you just need some help understanding it, call me and we'll talk through it. And if I never bill the first 0.1 on it, then so what? It's fine. And that's, it's not totally altruistic, because that strengthens our relationship. And I know that by helping them in that way, it's good for them, but it's also good for me, because they're going to think of me when they have real problems that they do need to send to me. I'm going to be the lawyer they think of. And so it's good for everybody, and it benefits everybody, and it's not likely going to result in my business going under.
Right.
All right. As we were recording this, are a couple of days out from the launch of the book, but by the time people hear it, yes, we're very excited. It will be out and available and for purchase wherever. Where can people find Do You Draw Pictures?
Well, you can probably answer this better than I can. I know it's on Amazon.
I'm usually asking that question, but I guess in this case I could have just stated it.
I know it's on Amazon. I'm pretty sure Barnes & Noble as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or you could just go to scarletoakpress.com, right?
Yep.
And you have links to everything.
Yeah. So wherever you normally get books. So if it's Barnes & Noble, Amazon, it's available in paperback, in hardcover, in ebook form, whatever form you want it. You can get it wherever it is that you like to buy your books. So where can people follow you online?
I am on Instagram and Twitter at Little Gavels in both places. I haven't been super active just because things have been really busy at work, but I'm trying to get better about it. I'm hoping to also eventually have some sort of an email list. I know a few people have signed up already, and I'm hoping to keep people informed on educational opportunities for their kids, things incidental to the book. So yeah, at Little Gavels on Twitter and Instagram, and littlegavels.com for the website.
All right. So if you want your kids to have a base understanding of what intellectual property is, go get the book, Do You Draw Pictures? And if you want to keep informed about other projects that are going to come out, go to littlegavels.com, sign up for the email list, or just follow Becki and we'll be sure to see all of it. Thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at RichterJW. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.